Good afternoon, one and all. A very warm welcome to this webinar on product compliance and safety testing for drones and UAVs being conducted by ICAT in association with Aspire and Society for Automotive Engineering Northern Section, SAE Northern Section. ICAT stands for International Center for Automotive Technology, and my name is Venkatramana and I serve as advisor in the TMC lab. It is an autonomous lab under Department of Heavy Industry and is involved in testing, certification, and R&D service for both automotive and non-automotive sectors, including recently UAVs and drones. So, a very warm welcome to all of you. This series is brought to you by Aspire as part of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, the 75th anniversary of our independence, to give boost to Atmanirbhar Bharat in this particular sector. So here today we have manufacturers, technical experts, and all the enthusiasts as part of the attendees. And we have got great speakers on the topic. And I would like to introduce briefly our first speaker. Our first speaker is Flight Lieutenant A.T. Kishore, who is CEO of Vidya Sangha Technologies, and he is an industry veteran in this field, including a lot of telecom areas like IoT, and as well as in the drones and UAV sector. He is also a senior member of the IEEE, and he is member of several key standards committees of the BIS, which are dealing with UAV and its components. Over to you, Kishore sir. A warm welcome to you, and over to you, Kishore sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And could I share my PowerPoint slide?
Yes, sir.
Is my slide visible? Is my slide visible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And the theme selected by ICAT is very noble, and it is actually proactive as India is moving to its Independence Day. We certainly look forward for some announcements from our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, and we have a very illustrious Joint Secretary for Civil Aviation Shri Ambar Dubey. We can look forward to some announcements pertaining to the context of where we all come from. We are all from UAV industry. Interestingly, this month of July had been quite an exciting month globally, especially US. There was one particular time when Sir Richard Branson was going to space. In another place in Florida, SpaceX mission for guiding a mission of the International Space Station. As you all know, International Space Station is there for last 20 years. So in the context of UAV, which is something that is proven by yesterday's event, completely without a pilot, it carried people as well. So people thought that it will take 10 more years for a UAV to carry people, but of course in the context of space it is a different activity altogether. We need to move from that capability demonstration of vertical mobility to even horizontal mobility. In that context, let us take a look at what is there for us to look at various standards. So we just saw yesterday a New Shepard that has gone up to 62 miles, whereas a few days back Sir Richard Branson's mission was 89 miles, and then of course you will begin to see the weightlessness just at the surface of around 20 kilometers. That is where high altitude platform systems exist. And so suddenly space became a very big tourist attraction, and we can expect a lot of interest in this segment going forward for decades to come. We have people who are all pioneers. They are great billionaires. They all invested in this industry. In fact, Microsoft has plans to launch more satellites. They already have a Azure in the space. Jeff Bezos was very vibrant yesterday when he came back in the capsule. And Azure Space is an example here. So it is just an extension of your operating system, Microsoft, even it is available in the space. And age is not a restriction if you have the youthfulness, whether it is 18 years on the left extreme or 82 years next to him or Jeff. It is the excitement that you get by participating in the industry that is dream from child to there is no age restriction at all. So I now would like to use this as a few motivational things and move forward to from drones to the UAV standardization in US. For a pilot certification, it is called a 107 certification, and recently Federal Aviation Administration allowed the UAV even in the night, and also for beyond visual line of sight testing at below the G space, that is 400 feet, which doesn't require much monitoring. Technically, no monitoring as long as there is no untoward thing. And so these are all the things that if you are in the industry of UAV, you could, at the minimum, you can be in the university campus, let it be IIT Patna or Kharagpur, Kanpur or anywhere, or public safety, or as a user of a government like a police official. You can monitor the streets or the environment, or certified remote pilot for a commercial operation, something like a regular small planes. You can have for the drone also for beyond visual line of sight, or you can have a model flight, which is not a real commercial one. Now, when it comes to UAV, it is more than the your skills. It is how your device, that is in the context of product testing and certification, that what we are discussing today. It is the ability of your chips. Qualcomm just now made an announcement that they are going strong in the robotics and also in the space that we are playing. So everyone is very much interested in this space because it is very promising. From now onwards, I'll be talking on the very much what pertains to all of us. We know that there is RPAS guidelines and also certification schemes, and from 2020 this is in place. And March 2021 there was a parliament has also it came out with a law, and we have car rules, and also we have the UTM legislation also. So basically, the certifications relating to regulations is there are certain rules. 15A enacted in 2017, RPAS operational guidelines, civil aviation requirements is there, and there are some chapters of the Director General Civil Aviation Remotely Piloted Autonomous Systems, chapter 6, 7, 8, talking about RPAS manufacturing aspects. And don't take off when there is no permission. That is NT, that means no takeoff when there is no permission. This particular thing has become a subject of lot of interest nowadays, with a company by name Happiest Minds reviewing the latest manifestation of this feature. We will see some announcements there, but in the existing original form, as far as Joint Director Sri Ambar Dubey sir said, not until end of the year will not implement it as it is in the digital sky, as people know about it. So there is a procedure for acceptance of the RPAS model. These are all explained in that guidance manual. And there is something called Digital Sky Platform, something unique to India, and Nandan Nilekani's team has came out with that. That is also undergoing tremendous research, and it has been given importance to give a shape to it, rather than from being a repository of the flight schedules to an operational theater looking at north, south, east, west of India, and become a theater of operations and coordinate the UTM operations, vertical mobility, combining air traffic control on the one extreme to urban air mobility, which the aspirations of the UAV industry, and an integrated airspace system, where I am aware of some research done by professors from IISc, where they have gone to an extent of modeling the entire India's air traffic system, including the wind patterns, and also some data that they got from various schedules, and then they can incorporate the information that would emerge from the data set that would come as time progresses from the UAV also. So very interestingly, people very easily assume that they can take a drone and fly for various applications. Unfortunately, or maybe the reality is it's not true. You cannot take any drone and fly as you wish. You first need to any drone about 250 gram by even 1 gram excess, you need to have a government registration, and you need to have all the facilities similar to what happened to MH370. After that Malaysian flight disappeared, the world community has insisted on any flying object to disclose its locations, that is known as ADS-B. It's a broadcast of dependent surveillance autonomous communication about where it is, so that the satellites and other systems in space will relate with the latitude longitude. Where we have in India, we have a NAVIC, and we have a GLONASS and other Galileo or GPS. That is also part of the story. So even if your drone is 255 grams, you need to be aware that you need to comply with a lot of such regulations. Not going to be very child's play. So no NPNT mandate going. So as I mentioned about it, there are some decision acceptance criteria, that is stage 1, 2, 3, 4 as made out in the rule book by the QCI, which I have adopted here, chapter 8. DGC RPAS guidance manual of 2020. So original equipment manufacturer, be it Tata Advanced Systems or Adani's or Idea Forge, which are the top 3 players in India, and of course there are Throttle Aerospace and others. And so OEM, original equipment manufacturers. So chapter 6 and 7 rules will apply, and then documentation submission to the DGCA for verification and acceptance. Then you have to familiarize and do a demo of your product and provisional acceptance, etc. And you have to go and populate yourself in the digital sky, so that you are ready to go. That had been the case. There would be small changes to this concept. Similarly, as when this was made, QCI about a year ago, less than a year ago, they identified that there are about 19 remotely piloted autonomous system models, and most of them are quadrators, like quadcopters. Some are having fixed wings, some are hybrid, means they can perform both the roles, and hexarotors. And there are also other variants that, as you could see in the visual, the small and so there are certain areas where you can, if you have investment interest, certain areas where you can certainly play a role. For example, nobody has apparently come forward with their large variant. It doesn't mean they are not working on it. I am aware of some companies which are pledging their nerves on the large variants, even to the extent what yesterday's demo flight. So it would look like a helicopter. You can also have a pilot there, but it can work without it. So it would be that kind of a model people are developing. And all the companies which have stakes in the aviation industry, right from Boeing, Airbus, they all have. In fact, BMW has made a flying car demonstration. And it would be not a science fiction if your car will tell you, take me to a nearest playground and I will fly because the road is congested. That could be the kind of a hybrid which people can talk about, rather than hybrid from electrical to fuel. And that could be the half on the road and half in the sky. And so those variants can happen, but mostly that's all. DRDO has a dominance in that space, NAL, HAL and others. So they have been focusing on partly importing and then researching further. So medium altitude and high altitude, or a low altitude with a long endurance, means more than 20 minutes like normally the child's play or for learning purposes. It could be hours together, maybe 2 hours, even more. Or if you talk about Global Hawk, it will go up to 7 days and thousands of miles and tons of weight it can carry. So that is the kind of extent the UAVs can do. And the certification scheme eventually will try touch base all those aspects as time progresses. We look forward for more thinking in these areas as the players like ICAT come forward and work with various players in the industry to take the discussion forward in the positive direction. So actually, this is all from your own book that is made by the QCI. There is, first of all, Director General Civil Aviation has got a directorate established for the UAV also, and there is a QCI body for the the certification aspects, and there are a few certification testing bodies and which can focus on unit level testing, integrated testing, maybe wind tunnel, EMI, EMC. Even ICAT has capabilities, as I heard from speaking to the organizers. And finally, it is the owner of the product. Finally, it is impacting the manufacturer. They have certain ISO, IEC certification schemes. They have to be compliant with all that. Even the Nano has to go through all this. Nano is 250 gram weight device. Now, basically, what we learned during our journey in the Bureau of Indian Standards, Dr. Abhishek, who would speak soon after me, is also one of our contributors. And the thing is that to mentor the manufacturers is not so easy because they are already matured, and what they expect is a minimum viable order quantity, like how the DJI of China got luckily few millions at once from government to underwrite their cost, but that scenario is not there here. So and it's not like academic. Lot of hand holding is required for the BIS and other specifications to sink in their minds to get to the level of perfection required for a global market. So basically, the existing philosophy assumes that you get a certificate of compliance from the manufacturer, like a self-certificate, and add with the certificate issued by the certification body and the QCI, and go to DGCA and then register yourself in the digital sky and fly. So there would be a few qualitative changes as we expect in this scheme, and it is going to be more robust, but not to be scared because we need to make it very safe. As you could see, we are talking about lives of the people. Even if it doesn't carry humans, but when it falls on the humans, it has to not to cause any accident. It should never fall on any human. So a few questions to ask are, when we do certification, are you inclusive of the aspects of UAV traffic management? It's a very big question. No easy answer. Similarly, are you inclusive of all the dynamics of air traffic management? You know, there are ATCs, and every ATC is very complex, like Bangalore International Airport. And we have UAV urban air mobility. That is the aspirational something how Jeff Bezos has demonstrated, or Sir Richard Branson has demonstrated, not to the extent of what they have done go into the space, but at least in the normal skies, people want to carry people and show that it is just like your ride in your Volvo bus. So that those aspects are very critical, which probably will take time to answer. And there are service providers for UTM, service providers for ATM, service providers for UAM, and also interconnecting them. And there are some interfaces between them. And to integrate all that requires a huge effort by government and industry and also academia. And Indian Air Force, DRDO, they are the stakeholders. National Homeland Security bodies, they also want to be stepped in. And anti-drones, as you know, there has been a focus after one seemingly a frivolous dropping of a drone in our Chimney Hills, Bangalore, and also one in Jammu that really proves that there were 61 incidents reported of untoward events wherein our national national focus is now towards anti-drones. Even BIS would also very soon come out with a standard towards that. Leverage the existing work done by the organizations like Professor Abhishek is there and others. And IIT Chennai, I came to know from Dr. Abhishek's discussions yesterday. And IISc, Dr. Onkar, Dr. Radhakant Padi and others. So there's a lot going on, and there is a, as I said, integrated air operational data sets are being modeled, and how to translate the mission to the UTM and digital sky into real practice rather than on the book or on theoretical considerations. And how do you make that available across India, not in trial basis on a small green zones alone, on a daily routine, like any street in the India, you have cars going around and there is a road rules regulations, and we are tackling the normal car traffic. Similarly, it should be there at one point of time. And how do you scale up to from the existing today's traffic to say 100x or 1000x, 10,000x within 5 years to 10 years? That is the big challenge. And there are some international tests with our models alongside others. So we have to take a Japanese UAV community or a maybe Canadian or a American UAV community, do model testing along with them, so that we are commensurate with the international requirements and our thinking is in sync. Urgent call for government to start investing its resources, energies and funds in this direction. Otherwise, it's not going to take off, because regulation without real testing is not possible. So even agriculture should not be neglected. We are already having a standard from Bureau of Indian Standard about how the agricultural UAV should look like. Like it should not spray near water, or it should not operate when there are people around, and it should just focus on its agricultural activity. And there are certain rules about the spraying devices and what chemicals to use, and the ability of the people who operate and all that. And you have to inform the nearest police and the law enforcement agencies before that. And as you know that Amazon Prime and other supply chain, in fact, in India, the cities like Hyderabad are given go-ahead green signal by government for dealing with the COVID-19 related distribution of vaccines or drugs or anything relating to supply chain of the healthcare, that has been given a signal. Similarly, earlier when there was a locust attack in the western borders, government opened up usage of drones to suppress the menace. And so what I strongly use this very noble activity that you are doing to stimulate discussion. I admire your work. So I want to use this to suggest that let us come out of our silo culture. I mean, Dr. Abhishek will tell that they're already embracing a lot of universities together in a unified research. That's most welcome. And the need for taking results into industry and mainstream. If we have innovated and then go to patents and then go to market and coordinate and support. So a lot of parallel activities are there. There are many teams which are thinking of that they need to be the defining entity for the national standard. So there is a need for synergistic thinking. So my concluding thought process is like this, that we have a great potential, maybe 2030, 2040, 2050. By 2050, actually, mankind is aiming at likes of all these adventurous space travel. We are trying to keep a small colonies in Mars and then look at moon as a launching pad. So that is the outlook of humans. Therefore, definitely UAVs perform a role. In this context, we have a Chilikere Chitradurga, that is a human space flight research center, and that would be a coordination of ISRO, DRDO and other bodies to take the research to next level. There is an untapped Indian talent in innovation, creativity in research campuses and industry corridors. Let us all come together. And there is openness to have win-win discussions and dialogue, as you have started it. Very welcome. And in fact, I am happy to be voicing my concern. When I was a flight lieutenant, there was a 25th March 1991. There was one incident, and that was to deal with the need for making the communication between the pilot, co-pilot to be more precise. So in fact, I would talk about some of those aspects in communication safety, security aspects on 29th of this month alongside Bureau of Civil Aviation Security. And also, I would strongly encourage use of 5G and 6G for the UAV, multi-UAV scenarios. I would be speaking on these lines in another forum. And given enough of encouragement, me and others, a part of private industry, would like to launch an Indian organization to take the entire players, all of us together, which is not for profit, to lead the momentum, and then we would definitely be in touch with you as you are doing the same. Thank you very much. There is no testing document written for the questions and answers. You please ask any question. I would be very happy to listen to them and then see if I could answer them. Thank you very much. I would stop presenting.
Thank you very much, sir, for the very informative session. And your message was very timely that we should all interact and not work in silos. And we will have the question answer session at the end, sir. And now I would like to invite our and introduce our second speaker, who is Dr. Abhishek from IIT Kanpur. He is an associate professor in the aerospace engineering department at IIT Kanpur. And Dr. Abhishek has obtained his master's and PhD in aerospace engineering from University of Maryland, College Park, US. And he's one of the, he's member of INAE, as well as he is also the Abdul Kalam Technology Innovation National Fellow for the year 2018 for having carried out highly innovative and application-oriented in the area of unmanned aerial vehicles and wind turbines. And as a leading expert in the field, and as you know, who is very much interested in developing the standards in the sector in India, it's our pleasure to have Dr. Abhishek. Dr. Abhishek, sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I'd also like to thank ICAT for giving me this opportunity to interact with them and learn from them. So I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Right. So the topic I chose was safety and testing of unmanned aerial vehicles through design and control. Now, I mean, I'm not really an expert on standards and compliances, but as an engineer, I mean, we have been trained to understand compliances and the need for them, and to integrate them in the design process itself, so that when my design gets ready, it is already meeting some of the compliances and it's already in a status where it could be of, I mean, like the job is sort of half done already. So now I thought, I mean, I'll just put this slide to give an overview that how different the unmanned aerial vehicles look and how different they could be. Broadly speaking, I mean, from the perspective of aerospace engineering, we classify them in these three categories: fixed wing kind, rotary wing kind, and flapping wing kind. So flapping wing is bird-like, which you don't see that commonly, but they are also something which is being researched, and eventually they would probably also see the light of the day in the, I mean, by coming into the market. So other designs could be either airplane kind or a helicopter kind, be it a quad rotor, multi-rotor, or whatever. To give you further elaboration on, I mean, how different this could be. So fixed wing could be like a normal, simple airplane kind of thing, but when you come to rotary wing design, there is a lot of variation, and then there are a lot of hybrid designs. So when rotary wing we see, there are designs where, I mean, you have rotors stacked on top of each other, rotors side by side, or front and back, or multiple rotors, single rotor design like a more conventional helicopter, and then wings and rotors together. So this is what we call a hybrid quad plane, having a quad rotor added to an airplane. Beyond this, there are even more unique and innovative designs coming up. Here I put some of the pictures of the unique and novel designs developed at IIT Kanpur. So this is one biplane tail-seater design, which looks like a normal drone when it is on the ground, but it also has additional wings. And when it takes off, it actually turns by 90 degrees to become an airplane. Another variant of that is actually a swiveling biplane tail-seater design, where you don't even require any kind of fixed wing control surfaces, and it actually is purely controlled by using 4 propellers which are there. And then there could be other designs also, like Kishore sir pointed out that there is already need for counter UAV solutions and so on. And there is in one of them, I mean, actually one of the possible counter UAV solutions is to use a unmanned vehicle to capture a rogue drone. So the drones itself actually may be part of the whole counter UAV system. So there could be another application for that. And then there is a huge talk about swarm of drones. So now there is one thing about worrying about the compliance of a single individual vehicle or a single individual unit of one kind. But then, I mean, when they start operating together in a collaborative manner, in a interactive manner, then the set of requirements and the set of compliances that this kind of system would have to meet may have to be sort of redefined, because this is a very new paradigm. These kind of systems do not exist for conventional fixed-wing aerial vehicles. You don't see fixed-wing UAVs operating in swarms, right? They may operate in fleet, where, I mean, there is human intervention, so the communication and all the collaboration actually happens in at that particular level. But then when it is actually being done autonomously, where there are multiple agents flying through and they need to communicate, collaborate, and achieve a task together, it brings forth a completely new set of challenges. So the overview is that I've already talked about some brief background. Okay, I'll talk quickly upon standards and compliances, why they are needed, and how we can ensure meeting some of them and also ensure the safety of UAVs. Because finally, one of the key reasons why we need compliance and standards is that to ensure that my UAV operates safely or my aerial vehicle operates safely during its entire operational life. So I'll talk about each of these two topics: safety of UAVs through design and also through enhanced control. So of course, I don't have to educate the audience about, I mean, the need for standards and compliances, but nevertheless, I will put it here. So the special technical standards and minimum safety standards have been established, and have been established and implemented for aerial vehicles to ensure their safety during entire operating life. So at the end of the day, our goal is to maximize the operational availability, which one can define as 1 minus flight hours per day multiplied with mean time to repair plus administrative downtime divided by 24 hours into mean time between failures. So our goal is to see how I can ensure that my system is available for my use round the clock. And that's where, I mean, meeting certain compliances would allow me to reduce the mean time to repair. If I have designed my system well and it actually meets the compliances in the correct manner, it would have lesser number of failures, lesser period required for repairs, and there will be smaller downtime overall. Now, what makes the whole problem very complicated is that UAV is actually made up of multiple different components. So it's a system of systems. And broadly speaking, I can qualify it into 3 categories. Structural systems, propulsion systems, and avionic systems. So in structural systems, we have wing, rotors, propellers, the fuselage, support structure. There could be transmission system, etc. Propulsion system is your engines, motors, batteries, fuel, etc. And avionic system could be communication system and autonomy system, because autonomy is actually a very critical aspect for an unmanned aerial vehicle, because you don't want the vehicle to be piloted all the time. I mean, as a matter of fact, I mean, right now, beyond planning the flight plan, the human intervention required to operate most of the modern UAVs is minimal. So that's where, I mean, perception sensors, actuators, and onboard computers become very, very important. And all of these actually, we need to set standards for each of these components, each of these subsystems, to ensure that, I mean, they are very safe to operate and they are reliable. So setting up standards and compliances for UAVs becomes a challenging task. So here what I've done is I borrowed actually one information from the standards which is there for the manned airplanes. So FAR 23.305. So that this particular standard requires for the fundamental requirement of meeting the strength and deformation requirements. So aerial vehicle, because we are always focused to make it as light as possible, unlike automobiles or other ground-based systems where the weight may not be your biggest concern. So I can, I mean, have some liberty to add additional weights. But for an aerial vehicle, weight actually comes at very premium. So each and every gram of additional weight is going to compromise my performance in a significant way. So the requirement is to ensure that, I should put enough material, okay, just enough material to ensure that my structure should support the limit loads. That is the maximum loads I expect my aerial vehicle to meet in its operational lifetime. Okay. Without detrimental permanent deformation, that is what we call the limit loads. And these deformations that it undergoes should not interfere with the safe operations. So of course, under loads, it will deform, but the deformation should not hinder my performance or operation. Other aspect is that it should be able to support ultimate loads, that is limit loads multiplied by a factor, and this ultimate load should be able to support without failure for at least 3 seconds. So this is the most absolute and fundamental requirement for manned aerial vehicles. So the question is, are we going to follow the same standards for the unmanned aerial vehicles, or are we not? And there is already a difference here, okay, because when we define ultimate loads for manned aerial vehicles, the factor of safety we take is almost 1.5. But for unmanned, because even in past, unmanned aerial vehicles were already there, because remotely piloted vehicles were already there from 1980s. So factor of safety for them was defined to be 1.25. So that is already set, from long ago. So do we continue to follow it, or do we change it? So these are some of the questions that we need to address when we look at the safety of unmanned aerial vehicles. Now, in the design philosophy, this design philosophy is again based on the requirements of the processes followed for manned aerial vehicles. But there is no reason why we cannot follow the same for smaller scaled down aerial vehicles, okay, which at times may look like a replica of a full scale aerial vehicle. So the two ideas which are very prominent and classical are fail-safe approach of design and safe life approach of design. So in safe life, I design a structure to have a minimum life. So I can design my landing gear by using this particular approach, so that if the component crashes, the whole landing gear is going to collapse. There is no redundancy built into it, and I replace my landing gear and I'm good to go. In the fail-safe approach, what I do is that I design the structure which is slightly complicated. It will have redundant support and redundant structures. So in this case, what happens that if there is a small minor failure within the structure, okay, the remaining components would be able to take care of the extra load up to the point that the failure is detected. So that actually brings forth the importance of inspection. So inspection schedules have to be defined and clearly outlined for the class of the vehicle that we are looking at. And this becomes then the integral part of the whole maintenance process, so that we can keep inspecting our platform on regular intervals and detect the failure before it becomes catastrophic. So this approach could be used for designing semi-monocoque wing designs or dual redundant control surfaces and so on. So that was in terms of philosophy. So of course, one would always try to lean more towards the fail-safe design approach to ensure that my concept is safe from failure. It is never going to fail. It has infinite life practically, but it can make the whole system expensive. So still, I would say that some of the components may still have to be designed using safe life approach. But then in UAVs, a lot of new things are happening, and so here I put pictures of some very recent developments. So the first picture is that of Vahana. This project has been completed by Airbus, and it was a technology demonstrator for urban aerial mobility. So it's a single-seater passenger vehicle which was developed by Airbus Industries. Second vehicle is Blackfly, made by a company called Opener, which is directly funded by Larry Page from Google. And third platform is actually a UAV, which is developed at IIT Kanpur. So why I put these three pictures is that I want you to see that these three have something unique, yeah, and it's something which you can very easily identify and see that all these vehicles actually have, interestingly, 8 rotors and 2 wings. Although the 2 wings have been arranged in very different manner. Okay. So here, it is in tandem configuration. Here it is in tandem and slightly with some vertical offset and also some orientation change. Here it is actually more in the biplane kind of configuration. But the reason is that why, I mean, 8 motors, okay? Why not 4 motors or 2 motors or only one motor propeller, that, like the way we have in conventional airplanes? So idea is to enhance the safety. So in the design process itself, now we have included redundant components. Okay? So that actually makes the whole design more reliable and safer. So we have 8 pair of them. If one fails, the 7 may still be able to reconfigure themselves, or the controller may be able to guide them to ensure that the vehicle is still controllable in perfect manner. Okay? So that is one thing. Okay? Also redundant control surfaces. You see that, I mean, the control surfaces are there on all the 4, in both the wings. So we have total of 4 control surfaces. Same actually is true about this biplane tail seater, and also for this black fly design from Opener. And the advantage of these things are actually not just related to this safety aspect, but it also gives advantages in terms of enhanced performance, in improved aerodynamics, also possible weight saving maybe due to lighter motors compared to smaller and larger, small number of larger and heavier motors. So this also, I mean, and the most critical advantage comes in terms of, because these vehicles are hybrid vehicles, they actually can fly in 2 different modes. One is the mode for hovering flight, and other is the mode for forward flight. And that can be handled because of this distributed propulsion. The third system that we need to ensure redundancy and safety is for the avionics systems. And for that already work is going on, and there are already solutions available in the market which actually offer that. For example, if you look at the new Pixhawk, so this is a picture of old Pixhawk. If you look at the new Pixhawk, which is an industrial standard for autopilots, it already offers duplex or triplex sensor suite. So all the sensors are actually repeated twice or thrice, so that if one set of sensor fails, you still have another set of sensor available to you to allow you to continue with the mission. Then we also require redundant onboard computer. Now, normally this was mandated or required for military grade aerial vehicles, where you have duplex or triplex or even quadruplex redundancy for onboard computers. But now, I mean, if we want to operate our UAVs in civilian area, where, I mean, it could be flying over rooftops and all, I mean, there is need for redundancy there also. So we need to ensure that, I mean, if one set of computer fails, there is another set of computer to take charge of the control and ensure that, I mean, there is no catastrophic failure. And actuators, so the servo motors may actually have dual motors inside, so that if one set of motor fails, another motor actually takes care of the thing. Redundant communication link is already getting used. This is not very hard to implement or maintain, where you ensure that if one set of communication link fails, I mean, the other may be able to still do the job for you. Nevertheless, there is always a fail-safe mode where, I mean, if the communication link fails, my UAV may return to home and land. And beyond this, so this is, I mean, regarding the redundancy coming in the hardware side. That is, I mean, how I ensure that my hardware actually is more capable with multiple layers of support. But then equally critical is the software aspect, where we require high performance autopilot software, which with enhanced control algorithms can do wonders for us actually. With the same system, without any change in design, I can achieve a lot more. And how is that possible? So let us look at the onboard autopilot software for the safe operation. So this autopilot already is performing a lot of roles to ensure the safety of the UAV in terms of controllability. It makes it more stable, it makes it easily controllable, and many modes are actually autonomously handled, so that, I mean, no human intervention is needed. But then, I mean, the highest form of autopilot is when you have automatic control system, where, I mean, you have full navigational autopilot, where you can achieve completely autonomous missions only with human intervention involved for planning the mission. And auto takeoff landing, all those things are built into that. But now if I actually sort of augment this basic autopilot, basic full autopilot with other features such as obstacle detection and avoidance. So now, I mean, if I launch my vehicle, it is automatically going to detect any obstacle on the way and avoid it, prepare a new path around it and go through that. Some of that may be obviated by using path planning and prior geofencing. So if I am aware of the complete terrain and I have geo-accurate maps available with me, where I know, I mean, where each topographic feature is located, I can simply plan my trajectory beforehand, which actually avoids all possible obstacles. But then, I mean, even then, I mean, there could be a sudden chance where some other vehicle may come on the way or some such thing can happen. So then obstacle avoidance could still be relevant in that scenario. A return to land or loiter is already an option which is available in all autopilots, which is a great feature to ensure safety. The moment your communication is gone, you don't know what your UAV is doing, where it is. So the UAV takes a safe route, tries to come back to the point where it can regain communication or comes back to home and land, which is the safest possible bet. But beyond that, there are more complicated and smart features that one can integrate through this autopilot, such as fault-tolerant control. So now I am talking about scenario where my UAV actually has a fault on board. One motor and one propeller settles is failed, or one of my actuators has died and I cannot control one of my ailerons, maybe. So the controller should be able to detect such failures, and it should be able to reallocate the control in a way that with the remaining available controls, I should be still able to maintain my mission and come back and land. While I also inform the operator that, look, this particular failure has already happened, and take note of this. So that is something which is an active area of research and under development and under testing also at some stages. Then robust control, that the control algorithm itself allows me to handle all kinds of uncertainties, because one thing which all UAVs are very vulnerable to is wind. So if there is a sudden turbulence in air somewhere, your UAV may completely lose its control and crash. But then if I have a better controller, it can still try to ensure that it actually regains its orientation as quickly as it could. And then some other fail-safe features also could be built in through the autopilot. So let me show you some quick examples of this. So in this case, you see the robust controller that we have developed at IIT Kanpur for this unmanned helicopter drone, which allows it to fly upside down, or remain controllable in any orientation. That is, it can do full 360 degrees flip maneuver and it can still remain controllable. So here you saw it flipping backwards and flying, I mean, as if nothing has happened. And then it flips back again, and it's being done autonomously. There is no human involved in this. Here you see it doing the same thing about the roll axis. In the previous case, it was doing about the pitch axis. You see it flying upside down. In the later part of the video, you will probably see it doing a barrel roll. That is doing a full 360-degree flip, double flip. So even with that kind of maneuvers, it's still stable. So the idea of doing this was that if my gust or wind tosses my UAV and makes it disoriented, makes it go upside down or at some other orientation, my controller should be still able to handle that and tackle that and bring it back to the stable, normal flying orientation. And that's what we achieved in this particular research. Here is a second aspect about fail-safe thing. That is, a helicopter is a single rotor design. Now, if what happens, I mean, if and it is powered by an engine or a motor. Now, if somehow my motor dies out or my engine shuts off because of some issue, what happens to my UAV? I mean, there is nothing to do to ensure that it can land safely. One would say, I mean, I would attach a parachute, but then attaching a parachute is actually weight addition. It actually eats away my payload, which is already small for a small UAV. So what we did is that we ensured that my UAV could do a maneuver which all large helicopters also can do. That is what is called auto rotation. So even when, so you saw we manually switched off the power and the vehicle could still come down in a controlled manner and land. And we did this from different heights. And every time, I mean, it actually comes down and lands very gently. It lands with a speed of almost 0.1 meter per second. And when even when it is coming from 60, 70 meter or 100 meters height. So this is an example where, I mean, improved control, enhanced control development allows you to build systems which actually offer superior safety. Here is from 60 meter here. And it does the auto rotation maneuver throughout, and we did this for the forward flight also, not just for hovering condition. Even in forward flight, it can do the same thing and it can actually come down and land safely. Then here is a quick demonstration of, I mean, what is obstacle detection and avoidance. So this is, I mean, demonstrated on a ground robot, but the same thing has been implemented now on UAVs also, and being used also to some extent. So here, I mean, you become aware of whatever obstacles are there on your way using some onboard sensors. And you may require multiple sensors to ensure that you don't skip or you don't miss any obstacle on the way. Okay. So this is also work done at IIT Kanpur by my colleague Dr. Kothari. Now coming to the testing part. Okay. So of course, I mean, I don't have to tell you about the testing of various subcomponents. I mean, for electromagnetic interference, for noise, for vibration and other things and so on, because you are already expert on that. What I am showing you here is actually testing of the entire UAV and the entire autopilot on that without actually having to fly the UAV. And that is achieved through what is called hardware in loop simulator. So this is a typical setup which we have at IIT Kanpur. So this could be a replacement of flight testing. So even before I fly, or I get the need to fly, I have the entire setup for a virtual helicopter or a virtual aerial vehicle, a virtual unmanned aerial vehicle set up on a computer, which has been tested and validated through prior simulations and prior experimentation. And using that, I can actually connect the entire vehicle in the loop. So in this case, we are only testing the autopilot and the actuators. So actuators are servo actuators and the autopilot. So you see in the servo stand and there is autopilot on the table. These are the only components being tested, but I can actually connect the entire UAV, sit it there, I can just strap it to the ground, and using this hills, I can test each and every component, how it will actually fly and do various things. The same setup could also be used for accelerated testing towards failure. Okay. If I want to check, I mean, how a particular component will fail, okay, I can even do that accelerated testing on the ground without having to fly or do any other thing. So this setup is very critical and very, very useful when it comes to testing UAVs, okay, and different components, especially the autopilot and other critical components. And this is the flow chart which tells you what does this actually consist of. So in this, the most critical element is the flight dynamics model, which represents your actual physical vehicle. Other than that, I mean, everything else is fairly straightforward. There are different models for sensors, for the actuators and so on. Sometimes the actuator may itself be in the loop, okay, and that's how you achieve the entire testing for the unmanned aerial vehicle in a nice and simple manner. So that is the end of my talk. Okay. So thank you very much for your attention, and we can have discussion at the end.
Thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful presentation. It was great to see that importance of fail-safe design. Now, finally, for our next lecture, the third and final lecture, we have Ms. Aditi Sethi, who is manager of EMC lab at ICAT. She has she is a graduate in electrical engineering from Delhi College of Engineering, and has more than 10 years of extensive experience in all areas of testing, including hardware and software. So over to you, Aditi ma'am. Would you kindly unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, you are audible now.
Okay, is my screen visible?
Visible.
Okay. Thank you, Ankit. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Aditi. I am manager in Electromagnetic Compatibility Lab at ICAT. So today I'll be discussing about the product compliance of UAVs or drones or RPAS. Okay. So to begin with, I'll briefly tell you all about ICAT. So we are located in Manesar, Gurgaon. We were developed by Ministry of Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises under the aegis of National Automotive Testing and R&D Infrastructure Project, also known as NATRF. So the investment at ICAT by Government of India is of around 1100 crores. So we have a very huge facility for the automotive testing, and recently we have been using this facility for other areas as well. Drones is one of them. So coming to the tests applicability of drones, there is no specific national or international standard for testing of a drone. So DGCA and Quality Council of India have laid down certification scheme for RPAS or remotely piloted aircraft systems in India. So I'll be discussing about that today. Key tests applicable in this scheme are electromagnetic compatibility, that is also known as EMC, then environmental testing, testing of the batteries being used in the drone, then functional safety testing, slide testing, and general requirements, which are mainly declaration by manufacturers. And one of the tests that is not part of the document is the acoustic power testing. I've also added a slide about it. Coming to the EMC, the QCI document specifically talks about related immunity test as per the international standard IEC 61000-4-C. This test is intended to monitor the performance when UAV is subjected to an electric field of a specific amplitude across the whole frequency band spectrum, and tests are performed at various field strengths according to their application. On the left side, I have put a picture of the actual testing being done at ICAT. Also, for the military applications, MIL 461 is the standard that is being followed right now in India. According to this standard, for the aircrafts, that is for drones, for Army, Navy, and Air Force applications, these are the tests that are applicable. The tests are CE 101, 102, CS 101, CS 114, 115, 116, and then rated emission 101, 102, and rated susceptibility, that is also rated immunity, RS 101 and 103. In the environmental testing, the QCI documents talks about damp heat test, steady state test, and cold, dry heat. All the drone is subjected to extreme weather conditions that are found in India, and the standard being followed is IEC 60068-2 series. Military 810 is used for the military environmental condition testing. Then for the batteries, the QCI document talks about IS 16046 Part 1 and Part 2 and IC 62133. According to the type of batteries being used, the specific standard is being followed. And tests which are included in this document are crush test on cells, then overcharging of batteries, thermal abuse, insulation and wiring tests, and temperature cycling. Then we can also do development testing of the battery for charging and discharging cycles, and many more, endurance, etc. Now coming to the noise regulations in India, this is not being followed right now, but for the European market, regulation number 945, which was published in 2019, is being used. According to this regulation, ISO 3744 is the standard that is followed for determination of A-weighted sound power level. In this, the rotors are operated at a speed corresponding to the hovering of UAV under maximum takeoff mass, and then UAV is tested for with and without the accessories in all the possible configurations, and sound power level is measured. Then this also is not referred in the QCI at present. Some firmware level testing is mentioned, but internationally IC 61508 is being used for such kind of applications. Now coming to the flight testing, in this type of testing, a drone is flown in an open area, and then many parameters are checked, such as speed, range, endurance, operational altitude, and stability and control. So these all are measured and determined, and then they are shared with the manufacturer that this is the performance of your drone in the flight test. So ICAT has also a test track area available for such kind of testing. where there are no obstructions, and a drone can be flown up to a certain height. This is about the ICAT facilities and the testing that is applicable on the drones. And these are our contact informations, or you can always contact Mr. Venkat, who is organizing this event. Thank you. That's all from my side.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for an excellent overview of all the major testing facilities and the different tests required for UAS in drones, both according to the QCI document and international norms. Now we will go on to the question and answer session. So I would kindly request the panelists to unmute themselves. We have the first question from Mr. Anurag Shukla. One second. Mr. Anurag, you have self-muted yourself. So kindly unmute yourself. Mr. Anurag, kindly unmute yourself. Okay, I think the attendee is self-muted. Yes, go on. Kindly introduce yourself and your company and the product, and please specify the question and the panelists who you want to answer them.
Okay, sure. So I'm a representative of Herbal Technologies. We are a DGCA certified manufacturer, and we have 2 of our drones listed as a DGCA certified drones. And when we consider the latest regulations as per the UAS rules 2021, so as the first speaker from QCI, as he mentioned some things like we have agri drone. He mentioned the point where we were talking about the agri drone or the spraying drones, right? So as we are talking about the spraying drones, which are like more than the 25 kgs of weight, and they come under the medium category, not just the small category. It's the Flight Lieutenant Kishore. Sir, I would like to just ask one thing, like since we are talking about the medium category of drones, which are more than 25 kgs, and hence, as per the UAS rules, they need the RT certification, the radio telephony license for the pilots to fly those drones. But when we are talking about the spraying drones, they hardly go above 20 meters of the altitude. So can a pilot without a RTR license can fly a drone without of a medium category if he is going for a spraying drone?
Flight Lieutenant Kishore sir.
Pardon, please.
Flight Lieutenant Kishore sir. I think anyone, Dr. Abhishek, if you also would like to answer, you can answer the questions, or Ms. Aditi, anyone. Dr. Abhishek? Sorry, I had unmuted you. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think the same problem probably would be with Flight Lieutenant Kishore also. So maybe he can take the question. I hope just unmute him also.
Right. Yes. Yes, sir. Dr. Abhishek, stay there, and I would just take the opportunity to answer back. Yes, any UAV above 250 gram definitely has to respect the rules of safety and pilot certification. So there is one regional training organization recently approved under the aegis of QCI DGCA for Dr. Senthil in Anna University, Chennai, where the agricultural pilot can go and get certified. Definitely, they need a certification. Without a certification, it is not allowed that you fly a plane of carrying the payload of 25 kilo. That your point is absolutely right. They need certification. I've completed my answer, Dr. Abhishek.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Dr. Abhishek, would you like to add some points here?
I mean, I don't have much to add here, but DGCA's norms are, I mean, so we have to obey that. And your argument that these drones don't have to fly at higher altitude is valid, but then, I mean, the same drone can be flown at actually higher altitude also, if someone wants to. So that is the perspective I believe DGCA has, and therefore, I mean, they have mandated that, I mean, any aerial vehicle, I mean, it has to be, if it is bigger than a nano class, I mean, you need a pilot's license or an operator's license to be able to operate that.
Okay. I hope Mr. Anurag, question was clear. And I have one question from a manufacturer who is not here. He couldn't attend because of Eid celebrations. So he had asked a question saying that regarding the software of the drone, specifically with relation to the QCI document. So the QCI document gives a certain firmware tests, but no particular standard or protocol is mentioned for that part. So should they follow some sort of standard or like or any equivalent thing was the question.
I mean, so there are standards out there. I mean, but mostly for military drones, to the best of my knowledge, there are various standards for software development for MIL standard UAVs and drones. But for civilian domain, see, the entire world pretty much uses in the open source autopilot software or small variations to that. So I mean, all the people who are using in civilian domain, they would be either using Ardu Pilot software or they would be using the PX4 software or some variants of that. So that way, I mean, these are fairly standard software which are being used globally. And these are open source. So whether there is going to be a mandated requirement that the firmware has to be closed source, it cannot be open source because that is the requirement for military side. But for the civilian side, I mean, I believe such requirements need not be there. But yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of such standards myself because I've not pursued that. But QCI would be the right agency to answer that, I would believe.
Yeah. In addition to what Dr. Abhishek sir said, there is one unwritten law, that is, where do you keep the data? So BIS has considered the scope of the data pertaining to your flight has to be known to the government, and it has to be programmed in such a way that it is accessible to the needy. So the law enforcement agencies or for fact-finding agencies, or let us say after a crash, as you do for digital flight data recorder, there are norms of how the data should be, what kind of parameters should be there or articulated. It is under wide circulation. And so also India has its own internet, National Internet Exchange of India, and the data, if you would like to keep it, it should be kept in some of the data storage and the data centers pertaining to Indian control, and not going to out of India for security reasons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have one question for Ms. Aditi. As you know that in the QCI document, we have only got the radiated immunity tests and emission tests are not being done. So could you kindly just briefly elaborate the kind of potential harms which can result due to that or the importance of radiated emission?
Yes. Yeah. The thing is that for radiated immunity, we check the performance of the drone under the influence of any electromagnetic environment around it. Similarly, this drone can, also emit some radiations that can harm other things or devices that are in the environment to it. So the test should be done both ways. But I am not sure why QCI has not covered it. But immunity as well as emission should be done as to completely check the device for the EMC part.
So regarding the EMC aspect, I mean, the electromagnetic radiation coming out of the drone, that actually is only dependent on the telemetry or the controller, the flight control communication module. So the communication devices which are right now being used on the drones normally meet the Wi-Fi standards. So they are either in the 900 megahertz range or 2.4 gigahertz range, mostly in the 2.4 gigahertz range. And these frequencies are in the same domain as your normal household Wi-Fi and that kind of thing. But yes, the amount of energy, that is what kind of power they actually are emitting, that depends on the communication range that the drones are actually intending for. So I agree. I mean, but this again, the kind of devices which are being used are fairly standard. There is not a lot of variation. The typical communication devices which are being used abroad, I mean, like in US, America, or sorry, I mean US, Australia, Europe, the same devices are being imported in India and also used, because in India right now there are no manufacturers who manufacture these telemetry or communication devices, and we are only importing them. So I'm assuming that they are safe and they have already been tested in their respective countries. But I agree with you. This could also be done. I mean, if it's a standard equipment which is used on every drone, then maybe it could be done only once, and then it is type certified. Once it is type certified, then I mean we need not actually do this. I mean, for every drone, because again, I mean, I would say that most of the drones in the country are using RFD 900 or one of its variants, which is also a fairly standard thing. I mean, abroad also and elsewhere also.
Yeah, Dr. Abhishek, in addition to what you mentioned, WLAN frequencies are 433 megahertz or sub 900 megahertz, which is used for testing or for learning purposes. If we look at little higher end ones, which are mostly in the closely guarded secrets of the militaries of the world, they don't restrict themselves to any frequency range. They have entire electromagnetic spectrum with them. Therefore, from the 5G point of view, India's one apex body has recommended a steering committee headed by Dr. Aragyaswamy Palrajan on the 5G spectrum recommendations to Prime Minister Office. They recommended the use of 5G for the UAV in the phase 2 of implementation. Therefore, in addition to WLAN frequencies and also 433 or 800 plus frequencies, you would see 700 megahertz, which is in Indian context not yet utilized, whereas in abroad it has been already used for television as well as for various wireless, including LTE and 5G. In India, it can be used for 5G. Therefore, it is expected that a separate drone specific use cases of 5G, wherein a drone can be defined as a UE, user equipment, or drone can be also defined as a base station providing internet access in remote areas. Therefore, very soon you would come across all that what the telcos would be doing with the wireless planning cell and the government DOT, telecommunication engineering center. Similar certification will happen for the drone, because it would be using the same transmitter receivers and in terms of dBm scale, the power output and the receive levels and sensitivities. So it would be easy for those who are already using them in the telecommunication industry for your smartphones, for the towers. It will be like your drone is also being tested like a base station, or also like a user equipment, or as a relay. All the three modus operandi testing is possible going forward for the 5G frequencies as well.
So thank you very much, sir. I think that was good. I think that it's good that regulations are coming up, and it will ensure product compliance and safety. Now, I hope that the talk was, we are running a bit short of time. For the rest of the questions, if any, you can send it to us. We will try to get them answered from the organizers and or relevant answers from the speakers. It was an excellent presentation by all three technical speakers. So now I would like to propose the final vote of thanks. First of all, thanks a lot to the speakers for their valuable time Flight Lieutenant A.T. Kishore, for enlightening us on different regulations, as well as in your question and answer about the upcoming regulations relating to 5G and so on. Doctor, as you had just mentioned, Dr. Arogyaswamy Paulraj is one of the most distinguished persons in the field specifically in telecom and signal processing. So, and his contribution is extensive to nation building and defense. And again, Dr. Abhishek, I would like to thank you for presenting an excellent talk on redundant and fail-safe design. I hope that will enable the designers and specifically the startups to plan these features in the drones at the design stage itself. And specifically that HIL testing part was also excellent. The simulation was also, simulator was also very I think it will be very useful, and we hope that the startups and the MSMEs, they can use the facilities at IIT Kanpur. It is a very renowned department, again serving the nation since many years. And finally, Ms. Aditi, thanks a lot for the overview of all the facilities offered by ICAT and answering the questions. And this event is brought by Aspire. So Aspire stands for Automotive Solutions Portal for Industry Research and Education. We would like to thank them sincerely. And I would also like to thank at this point ICAT senior management, our Honorable Director, as well as the head of EEL EMC Lab, Dr. Madhusudan Joshi. And also, I would like to thank the ICC team for arranging the event, and Mr. Sudarshan. And thank you one and all. And we hope that this event was useful to the industry. It is the endeavor of ICAT to bring the diverse stakeholders together and provide service in order to contribute in the development of quality products in the country. So this event was also conducted as part of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, as part of our 75th anniversary of independence. So thank you one and all. Thank you for the attendees. And if you have any questions, kindly mail to us, or I will try to reach out, and we will see how we can answer the question. Thank you one and all. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Venkat. Thank you, SAE India, and thank you, ICAT, and Dr. Abhishek, and my fellow panelist from ICAT, Aditi Sethi. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all attendees.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.